The virtual lounge is open, Ty Ray and Nick Gelso, and it is our weekly recap of Mad Men, episode 4. I can't believe, Nick, only 3 more episodes left. I think we just started this, didn't we?
Yeah, I'm still not sold on the whole splitting up the seasons over the course of a year, Ty. I'm not sold on it.
Well, at least they're getting to the good stuff already. We're only 4 episodes in.
For nothing less, it's almost ensuring, doing it this way, 7 episodes in the spring, another 7 episodes in the fall, it almost ensures us that AMC has to put a lot into making this season in particular extremely interesting. It's the final season anyway, so it's going to be interesting, but in order to captivate you and make you want more and wait 4 months for it, the first 7 episodes better be damn good.
I thought last night's or Sunday night's episode was outstanding. There was so much symbolism in it, Nick. I love it. I love the first segment of Mad Men where Don goes to the office. He's got a chance to get back in the groove. He walks into the office, and there's nobody around because he doesn't receive the memo that they're going to be putting a computer into the lounge where they do all of their creativity.
Yeah, and I think let me correct you there for a minute. Not only did he not get the memo, I think the insinuation was that Don's not, relevant enough to even need the memo. And you're right. And folks, keep in mind, this is 1970. A computer, we think of a tablet, an iPad. A computer in 1970 was about the size of my house.
Huge.
Yeah, so they needed the entire creative lounge area for this computer. And Don walks in, and he comes into an empty office. The phone is off the hook. I don't know if there was some symbolism to that aspect, and then he goes into where they're having the staff meeting, and pick it up from there, Ty.
Yeah, Don's hit with Roger. Roger looks at him, "You're late." Don's like, "What do you mean I'm late? I had no idea this was going on." So, of course, we get right off the bat, even though Don has returned to Sterling Cooper, things have changed. Don is just not that important. No one cares.
Yeah, but I did find it interesting. It's still, and I think it's foreshadowing to what we're going to see in the next couple episodes. Sterling he's still, no matter what's happened between Don and him, they've had that love-hate over the past couple seasons. No matter what, Sterling is still watching Don's back.
He does have Don's back, definitely. And after he said that Don was late, it was kind of like all forgotten. Remember?
Yeah.
He's like, let's catch a drink off campus.
No, but before that, he said, "Come on in my office and let's celebrate our technological advances." And Don says, "I think that would be considered a bit worse than showing up late." And that's when Sterling says, "Let's have it off campus."
Of course, drinking does go on much later in the episode, but I found it interesting, Nick, that the creative lounge is going to be replaced by a computer. So you have the struggle between now automation, this is 1969, automation coming in, and creativity being stifled, which is the case in America today in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you're watching the beginning of, what is the big fear? Computers will end up, and we're seeing it happen more and more, will end up taking the place of human beings in the workforce. Ty, what strikes me is, throughout the entire series of Mad Men, I often wondered who was calling that office, because that phone rang nonstop out in the cubicle areas where the secretaries were. So it was constant typing and phones ringing. It was annoying. It was funny almost. How busy are you that you ring that much? But plus they had a whole roster full of receptionists who answered the phone sitting in a closet off the lounge in the original firm that they were in. So that said, I'm picking it up now. The installation of this computer, Ty, sounded like they were building the Empire State Building. I mean, it was like hammers and saws, and this was going on for what seemed like weeks.
And that's a very good point you make about the episode too, because I think that added to the atmosphere of the episode as well. In fact, there was all this noise in the background driving Don ballistic, just nuts.
Well, sure, he's sitting there in an office with nothing to do. He can't drink, which was always a big part of his work day. He's not been given work yet. When he does get assignments, it gets really interesting, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But he just kind of sits in that office like a dumb soul and listens to all this banging and drilling and hammering and all this activity going on that he's, frankly not a part of. And who, of all people, takes an interest in Don when no one really has since he's returned? It would be the guy from IBM.
Yeah, so they have this great conversation about...
It was weird.
It was a very weird conversation. They got along in the beginning. Near the end of the episode, they didn't because Don got drunk, but we can get on that later. So Don gets this great idea to play hero, doesn't he? He gets the idea that this computer company will need advertising. So he goes into Bert Cooper's office.
And Cooper, let me interrupt you for 1 minute. Cooper has a much larger role so far in this season, and I'll leave that open for Calvin to rebut if he'd like to. But yes, he's had a much larger role, and he's also had a much more authoritative role. So as you're thinking, time would go on, Cooper's getting older, he's obviously a bigot, we know that. He's getting less relevant, but in reality, he's kind of taking control of the firm again.
So Don's coming back his very first day, back to the office. He has this conversation with the computer guy, finds out that the company that this guy works for may need advertising. So he goes into Bert Cooper's office, kind of like playing the conquering hero. Hey, Bert, I've got a great idea. And Bert is like, no, we don't want to hear from you, Don.
Yeah,
we could care less.
How demeaning, and not just demeaning from the standpoint of, I'm forgetting we're on video here, Ty, because I was just about to lounge back on my chair, but not just demeaning from the fact that Cooper just totally says we're not interested in you. He basically says that.
Yeah,
also,
you're irrelevant.
The fact that Draper goes marching into, well, first he went to Sterling's office. Sterling obviously was off at that hippie farm or wherever the hell he was.
Right.
And Sterling's not there, so he goes to Cooper. Love that he's still, you have to take off your shoes to enter Cooper's office. It cracks me up. But even the way he walked in the room like, oh, I got a big idea, it was like sad. I was sad again for Don.
His creativity was stifled. And, of course, Cooper tells him, isn't it amazing, Don, how we got along without you fine?
I didn't
just totally taking a knife right to Don.
I didn't realize the animosity between Cooper, and the partners against Don. And I did go back and rewatch Don's breakdown. Honestly, Ty, I didn't think it was all that bad.
I didn't think so either, other than the story was very graphic to Hershey's.
Upsetting.
And they lost the account.
They lost the account, and I'm not sure why either. Like, as a client, I probably would have said, man, I'm really sorry that your childhood blew, but you gave us a great campaign, and if you can, produce advertising as well as you could fake that story about you and your father, then you're our guy. But instead, they threw them out.
But having said that, it was 1968 probably. Yeah, 1968. Men weren't open with their feelings in 1968 like that.
Neither was
that was perceived as a weakness. So I think today you may be right. Maybe that would be perceived as maybe something that was interesting or something that would captivate a client, that particular story. But I think in that era, it probably was perceived as weakness. They lost the account, and the people around Don perceived it as him having a nervous breakdown, which, by the way, I didn't really see that as the case at all. I thought he was just kind of having to come to Jesus in front of everybody, where it was the very first time I thought he was really honest with himself.
I thought it was almost like, I don't want to call Don Draper gay, but it was almost like coming out of the closet. You've been faking this person for so long. Some people know, and that's looming over your shoulder, and really you're getting it all out in the open and off your chest. Unfortunately, he did it in front of one of the biggest clients they could ever have, and they lost. But again, I think we both mentioned early on in our recap series that Don is in free fall. I stand by that statement.
He's on the way up now. It
took the drunken fiasco for that to happen, and if that, Calvin, is not free fall and rock bottom, I'm not really sure what is for him. So yeah, I stand by my statement. He was in free fall in episodes 1, 2, and 3. I believe the drunken fool he potentially could have made of himself in episode 4 on Sunday kind of was his rock bottom.
Well, he hit the floor, and now I believe he's on the way back up.
No doubt.
But before we get to the drunken Don, the episode gets really juicy because Pete Campbell, while he's out in California, has a chance to pitch the national fast food chain, Burger Chef.
Which is it? I love the name of it.
Yeah, it was actually around until 1996.
Oh, there was it was real?
Yeah, it was based out of Indianapolis.
Didn't know that.
So Pete calls the office. They all gather around. They decide to get Don in on creating the pitch for Burger Chef. So Lou Avery, who I cannot stand, I want to kill the guy every time I see his face.
I know you hate him.
I want to punch him in the face. Well, Lou thinks he's being so clever here. He thinks he's being so clever. Clearly, he's threatened by Don, wants Don out of Sterling Cooper. So Lou calls Peggy, and of course Peggy thinks she's going to be read the riot act about something. But no, instead Lou has devised this plan to pit Peggy against Don, hoping they'll both destroy each other, cementing his power at Sterling Cooper. So he agrees to get Peggy a $100 raise a week to work on this Burger Chef account, and Don is going to work under her.
Oh.
So Lou knows all of this. He knows that this isn't going to fly well.
Yeah.
So initially, Don is okay with being called into Peggy's office and listening to her marching orders. And then it just doesn't sit well with him because he's like next to, the guy's not an intern, but the guy's like half his age or whatever. This other kid he has in the office is going to work on the pitch with him.
Yeah, and the other kid is so green and so absolutely excited about the fact that he's been assigned this, that and then Don is just completely the opposite. I mean, he is oh geez, Don is like, feeling probably the lowest he's felt since Mad Men started, because he's literally writing tags for Peggy, who he gave the first opportunity to as a woman to advance.
He taught her, right.
He taught her. I mean, that's his protege.
And once again, I'm going to disagree with somebody who rebutted our episodes. Because I really believe that this episode, again, proves how much Don and Peggy are alike in a lot of ways.
Now, explain that, because I don't feel that. I mean, I feel that they are alike. We've talked about it. I don't understand how the two correlate together.
Oh, I think that they both would handle that situation similarly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a tough one. Easy for me to say. Similarly, right. And I think Peggy avoids the conflict like Don would avoid the same conflict. I think that there are some serious comparisons to be made between the two, and we could go into this in a further episode, but I'm interested to see how this relationship develops over the course of the next 3 episodes, the remainder of the season. But getting back to Peggy, so she barks the orders at Don. Actually, she doesn't really bark at him, but I think...
No, she's kind of almost pussyfooting.
Awkward, right.
Yeah.
And anyway, so Don gets the orders. He goes back into his office, closes the door. Now, here's where I think symbolism comes into play here. This is really interesting. He's in Lane's office. He finds a 19...
Yeah, what is that?
Okay, he finds a New York Mets.
I know, but what's the you know what I mean. What's the point? I don't understand what the symbolism is behind it.
Well, you could say that Don has committed career suicide, right? Because he's in Lane's office. Lane committed suicide. Mm-hmm. However, the 1969 Mets Nick, are known as the Miracle Mets.
Okay.
They won the World Series that year, and
Okay.
they sure showed that pennant over and over and over again in the episode. And maybe I'm reading into things a little too much, but that was a historic year for baseball, a historic year for the New York Mets. They came out of nowhere, nowhere to win the World Series. I mean, out of nowhere. They had no business winning the World Series that year. So I'm wondering if there's some symbolism here between the miracle that maybe Don can actually change or turn his life around against all odds.
Right. Yeah. Right. You know, it's almost leading up to what we're talking about, which is Don, you know, on the turn from being at rock bottom to, okay, I can make it back. And Don actually hangs the pennant up, but when you open the door, it hides the pennant, which I felt was kind of interesting as well.
Now, here's another interesting tidbit, and you know I always look at the details, every scene of Mad Men. I get really caught up, and I find it fun. It's almost like when I was a little kid at the dentist playing with Highlights magazine. Remember, you'd open it up and you'd find, maybe I'm dating myself here, you'd be in the dentist office and you would have to find objects in these pictures and you'd circle them. Anyway.
I'd say you're dating yourself.
I'm dating myself. Look it up. It's Highlights magazine.
Oh, man. That's great.
So Don's laying on the couch.
And
he's reading a book called Portnoy's Complaint. It was a very controversial book in 1969 about sexual frustration.
Okay. Wait, repeat that. I'm missing it.
No, this is really interesting. So remember, Don is laying on his couch in his office for one of the scenes.
Right.
He's reading a book called Portnoy's Complaint.
Okay.
It was written in 1969. It is a book about masturbation and sexual frustration.
Okay.
No, seriously.
I missed that.
Seriously. And so I always look at whatever they do on that show as having meaning, because they just don't put things in there by accident. So this book tells me that Don's reading this book about masturbation and sexual frustration because he's not screwing anybody.
Yeah, well, he's not screwing anybody figuratively because he doesn't have the power to do it right now, or literally because he just ain't getting laid. But
that's my point is, well, he could. And my point is maybe he's becoming a changed man, is what I'm saying. He doesn't want to cheat on Megan. Maybe he wants to make his marriage work. We already talked about the incident with Nev Campbell where his magic didn't work on the airplane when he was flying back from New York to LA to New York. So fascinating that he's reading this book. It's called Portnoy's Complaint, and I guarantee you that book is not in there by accident on the show. No way.
It's interesting that you do watch the symbolism so closely, and it's gotten me watching it as well. Like, I was wondering what the point of the off-the-hook phone was. You know, what was the point of the Mets pennant? So, yeah, very similar to another AMC program, Breaking Bad. Everything is there for a reason. Everything has a point, and I think you're right about that. I think it's kind of amusing almost.
Yeah, I just thought it was really funny. I saw him reading that book, and I'm like, first of all, Don's reading a book. This is very strange.
Yes.
And so I looked at the title, and I said, quick, Michelle, get to Wikipedia. And we did, and that's what we found out about the book. And in 1969, this book was very controversial. So a lot of fun. And then he starts playing solitaire.
Yes, well, I think that was almost intentional because he knew Peggy was going to call for him shortly. So he wanted the kid who was going to come in and call him to see him, saying he's busy, but he's playing probably the game that most people identify with being bored, which is solitaire.
Yeah, and it was also a way maybe to show that Peggy's orders to him were just so insignificant that he didn't care.
Well, I think that was his point, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
He was making a point because it was so, to say the least, it was really, really, really awkward to see Don in that position where he had to go into the room and sit on the couch, which is kind of like the underlings area where Don always leaned up against his desk when he was in charge of creative. So he sits on the couch and he looks so pathetic, and really, again, feeling bad for him because he's been demoted pretty much. So next time around, he says, F you, Peggy. You're going to come to me or I ain't coming. So that's where the solitaire part takes place, and it's kind of like Don taking a stand.
It is like Don taking a stand, and then Don says, screw you. He goes and gets a bottle of vodka, takes it in his office, pours it in the Coke can, which I thought was kind of funny since nobody's going into his office anyway. And he gets completely shit-faced at work. The one thing that's great about John Hamm, he plays a great drunk. He does. He looks the part when he gets drunk. For such a good-looking guy, when they need him to look drunk, he looks terrible.
Yeah, he looks terrible, and it is, again, symbolism. But who saves him? The guy they ended up firing,
Fred Rumpson.
Fred, because he was an alcoholic. So more irony there, more symbolism. Fred, pretty much carries Don out of the office. Not before Don has an opportunity to start blasting the IBM guy.
Yeah, right. He actually confronts the IBM guy. I'm not really sure. I gave that a little thought. I didn't really come up with anything from that confrontation. I'm sure there was something there. I'll have to give it a little more thought. But Don has the confrontation with the IBM guy. Fred pulls him away before Don makes an even bigger jackass out of himself and shows that he's a drunk, which would be in violation of the terms of him coming back to Sterling Cooper. So Fred and Don are supposed to be going to a baseball game. That obviously doesn't happen. Instead, they go to Don's apartment. Don passes out, and Fred, this guy that everybody treated like garbage, basically, is the man who comes up with the words of wisdom for Don in the long run.
That put him back on track.
Don, basically, get over yourself.
Yep.
Get back to work. Get back to doing what you do well. Do it for yourself. Don't let them ruin you.
It's really the turning point for Don, because he is not going to dig himself out of the hole unless he does get back to work, because he is the best in that office at that position, in the creative position, and he's got to kind of work his way up the ladder again, which we're going to see as the episodes wear on. And we know, I would be pretty shocked if Don doesn't come back with a vengeance and show everybody that he hasn't lost it.
I don't know, Nick. I don't know about that. I think that, he more than has the capability of doing that. He's the most talented person in the office. But I think that they, meaning the management team there, has it out for him so much. They don't want to see him succeed. I think Bert made that clear. Bert wants him to die on the vine.
But don't forget, honestly, Sterling is still on his side.
That's true.
He's still on his side. So, I think that he's going to have his back. I think Sterling is going to be conniving as he normally is and manipulative, and know that Don can make Sterling look good and make him continue to be relevant. That's my take on it.
What does Roger do? I want his job.
I'm not really sure, besides make us laugh,
Yeah, he landed one account over the years, Lucky Strike. And that's appropriate, too. Think about that, Lucky Strike. And Roger landed that account, and it got him into the firm and kept him there and loaded for years and years and years to the position of power he's in now. And he's facing kind of a crisis right now. He, in this episode, was a key figure where his daughter left to join a commune.
Yeah, what's up with that?
What we saw, it was really interesting, was it the third episode where she calls him to lunch and says, Dad, I forgive you.
Right.
She's married, she has a child.
Right.
And she calls him to lunch to say, I forgive you. And it was very awkward. They part ways, and the next thing we know in this episode, Margaret, his daughter, has taken off, left the child, left the husband to go live in a commune. And Roger's wife, Mona, gets a hold of Roger. Mona, what a bitch. But anyway, they get can you imagine traveling in the car with her?
At the same time, at the same time, Ty, I mean, Roger is a handful. Could you imagine being married to him?
No.
Come on.
Like being married to a child.
Yeah.
So So Don, this is really amusing to me. So Mona tries to play the strict mother. You've got to come back. You've got to be a mom. Margaret's not having any of it, so Roger decides to play the good father. He's going to stay, and he's going to relate because he's much more hip to Margaret than Mona could possibly be, right?
I took it differently. Keep your thought, but I kind of thought he just wanted to get stoned because Roger's been dabbling in all sorts of weed and acid.
That's a good
and
point.
Who the hell else knows? But go ahead.
That's a very good point. So Roger hangs out at the commune, hangs out with everybody. He's even peeling potatoes. I'm like, come on, Roger. In a suit, he's peeling potatoes. He thinks he's so cool.
Roger, though.
No, I do too. So Roger spends the night at the commune, and he's laying under the stars with his daughter Margaret. They're reminiscing a little bit about childhood, and he's telling his daughter he gets it, he can understand, until, and this is very interesting, until his daughter's lover comes and grabs her from his bedside, which is the ground, by the way.
Right.
Takes her downstairs. They're going to go have sex. And Roger suddenly in the morning becomes very old-fashioned. He was so weirded out. And it was kind of creepy if you think about it. At first, the guy wanted to have sex with Margaret right by Roger.
Yeah. It was definitely
very creepy.
Yeah, it was definitely, they weren't just sharing drugs and a house and no running water. I think they were banging. I mean, I think, that was kind of like an orgy, as John Lennon would say, an orgy.
So Roger, this is the funny thing, is Roger is so weirded out by the fact that his daughter would have sex so easily with this filthy guy. And in the morning, he's so upset by this. But yet, Roger is such the hypocrite because all he's been doing in the other episodes is having sex with the Manson family.
I realize that, but it's still his daughter.
But it proves he's a hypocrite, right?
Yeah, but it's still his daughter.
My point is this: he has no legs to stand on with Margaret, who makes a very, very tough speech to him about being an absent father, because Roger accuses him, or her rather, of being an absent mother, giving up on her child, and she basically says to Roger, listen, you were never a dad to me. You have no right to talk to me that way. And it's really kind of a sad ending.
It hits home with Roger, too, as he kind of walks away with his tail between his legs, because, honestly, she's right. She's gorgeous.
She's spot on. Yeah.
As a hippie, she's gorgeous. As a snob,
as a hippie,
donkey puncher, but as a hippie, she's a stunning lady.
She is a very gorgeous woman. Of course, when she went to lunch with Roger that day, she was beautiful, but she looked great, natural as a hippie, as one of the Manson family. That's not fair. They're not the Manson family. They're just a bunch of hippies, and that was very common back then in the late '60s, early '80s. I actually lived through that time, Nick. That was a very weird time.
I thought you were going to say you lived through certain similar circumstances.
I lived.
Sorry, were you in a log cabin?
No. I lived through the era of streaking. You missed that.
Well, no, it kind of came back when Will Ferrell in Old School decided to streak through the streets.
Oh, I still can't get that out of my mind.
That movie is so good. That movie is hilarious.
We're going from Mad Men to Old School.
Yeah.
That's a tough segue to make, Nick.
So true. So true as I take off my hat. Ty, as we're wrapping up this episode, I think it's important, and I know we got a couple more points to make on Mad Men, but it's important to welcome those, as we've now have some people enter our Google Hangout, to our Google Hangout. So please like Beats and Eats on Google+. Circle us and join our circle for Beats and Eats, so that way we can alert you of when we are going to be doing live broadcasts with video. From time to time, we are going to be doing this more often, Ty, correct?
Well, I'm laughing because Megan said she expected us in Mad Men clothing. I could go get my skinny tie and slim-fitting suit.
Megan says, yeah, Ty, you were in Mad Men clothing out at South Coast Winery.
I love that era. I love that era of clothing, the real slim-fitting suits, the skinny ties. I was born in the wrong – well, actually, I was born in the right era, I guess, but I was too young to – my mom didn't dress me up in the John Kennedy suits in the 1960s.
My mother did, only it was the 1980s when she was doing it, so it wasn't quite as fashionable.
So let's wrap this up, Nick.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Don before we go. Don recovered. He leaves his house, goes back to work, tells Peggy he's going to get those tags done. He's going to be a good boy. He's going to just put his nose to the grindstone and do his job. And this is what I thought was interesting too, Nick, was the final song of the episode, which is On a Carousel. How appropriate.
Very appropriate, very. And it was, again, given a major emphasis at the end of the episode. You know, it's symbolism. Yep. And Don's at the typewriter. God, I mean, I don't think in 7 years we've ever seen him type anything because he just always had somebody taking dictation.
Yeah, he's always barking orders.
He was on the typewriter when he mailed in the newspaper, remember? One of his early breakdowns was when he didn't he mail in a newspaper about a client or about clients in the ad business. And remember what I'm talking about here?
I do. No, I do. I do remember that. That was a while ago. That was a while ago. You're right. It looked weird to see Don at the typewriter just pecking away at the keys there, doing the, you know, what do you call that? Yeah. What's a typewriter? Can't believe I used those in college.
You know, it's so funny you say that, and as we're wrapping this episode, I might as well tell you, I recently dropped my iPhone and shattered the screen, so I had to go up to Best Buy and anybody out there, Nick Gelso highly endorses the Best Buy insurance plan. If you're going to buy a cell phone, buy it through Best Buy because everything's all inclusive. And no, they're not paying me to say this today. I mean it. So anyway, I'm up at Best Buy getting my replacement phone, Ty, and here I guess they're doing this kind of return policy now where you could take old technology and bring it there and they recycle it for you. You don't get anything for it, but I guess it's a safe way to dispose of technology. Well, while I'm standing there, I don't even know if this would be considered technology. It was like a word processor from, I don't even know what year. It resembled a typewriter, but I think it was a word processor. So that just reminded me of that. Don't ask me how that's relevant because it's really not.
Well, it's perfectly relevant to me because I got to thinking when Don was on the typewriter during the episode, I was on typewriters in college for my communications classes, so I remember it very well.
Can I tell you something? One of the things, I mean, you could talk, I'll talk very highly about private education. I'm 12 years Catholic school trained, but one area where they were a bit behind was technology because obviously they just didn't have the money for it. So when I was in high school, freshman and sophomore year, we were learning how to type on typewriters, Ty. And by the time they got a computer lab, it was 1996 and 97. Windows was already well established and in most homes, and they were teaching us DOS.
Wow.
DOS would be similar to what we deal with a lot now, which is HTML code. And that's funny because unintentionally, because they didn't have the funds, the school taught us DOS because they couldn't afford Windows. And here I'm actually using it today, where in geometry, 3/4 of what they taught me, I never used it once.
Well, it's funny you say that. When people ask me the most important class that I've taken, and I'm not kidding when I say this, it was my 8th grade typing class.
Really?
I use it every day. Every day.
Did you do pause where you had to have your fingers on the keys?
Dude, I whip out 70, 80 words a minute, and that's been very valuable.
You could take you could take Jones' job.
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Michelle admires my typing abilities. I don't type as much as I used to, but when I was on Deadline in the newsroom, man, I would fly on Deadline.
Dude, get your hoop skirt on and get in Mad Men. You could be one of the secretaries.
I don't know. I can't compete with Joan in many areas.
Not many women can. On that note, again, and I want to make this clear because there will be the majority, the bulk of the people listening to our Mad Men recap today, Beats and Eats, will be listening on iTunes, Stitcher. Now tune in. We are in TuneIn. And also our mobile app, free mobile app. But we are broadcasting this live on Google+, Google Hangout, which we are going to be doing more frequently now. It's interesting, Ty, because we always talk about releasing our bloopers of different things we do messing up during the recording process for Beats and Eats. Well, when you tune in to Google Hangout, the live version, you're seeing the live cut, which is kind of like the bloopers. There's no music, no sound effects yet. It's kind of the raw audio, and it's a new thing for us, so we're going to be doing it more frequently. For you to get involved, you've got to circle Beats and Eats on Google+. So
you can hear me mispronounce the word similarly over
a
and
million
over.
times because I have to. That is my most frequently edited thing with you, Ty. Similarly. So anyway, beatsandeats.net/Google Plus is the URL to like our Google Plus page, circle us so that way you're notified of when we are going live. We'll start scheduling events, etc., etc. So if you're listening on iTunes, go over to beatsandeats.net/Google Plus, and you could then be involved in our live shows where there's a chat room. Thank you, Megan, for joining us today, as we did not publicize this. Megan still came anyway, so we really appreciate it. She says you're welcome. Okay, but let's see here.
Can you see my Twitter handle?
You've got to be on Twitter to see Coog88. That's Ty Ray's Twitter handle, and this was fun, Ty. I got to say, Megan, thank you for showing up, because really this has been kind of like a beta for us. We're doing a test on this, and to have somebody here, Ty, we haven't done live radio because we haven't been on CLNS postgame shows very often this year.
No.
So we've not done live radio for CLNS or Beats and Eats. You obviously do it every morning on your morning show, but I've not done it in quite some time. So it's kind of a flashback, kind of fun to know there's people listening.
Yeah, very, very, very fun to know that people are listening. So I encourage Megan to welcome other people here, and you want us to do more live shows, let us know. We'll do them.
Yep, keep in mind, folks, www.beatsandeats.net/Google Plus. And while we're on that topic, and while we're closing the show, Ty Ray, I'd also like to bring to the attention of the listeners about our survey. Ty, why don't you go ahead and explain what that's all about?
We really want to keep our programming free at CLNS Radio and Beats and Eats. We're encouraging you. It's like similar, Nick.
There's the bloopers.
We're encouraging our listeners to take a survey you can find at CLNS and Beats and Eats as well. It's very important. It lets our advertisers know what kind of demographic we have. Please, please take that survey for us.
And you can find it beatsandeats.net/survey1. The number 1, not spelled out. So anyway, Ty, I guess that's it. And any other comments on Mad Men? Any comments on possibly what will be happening in Episode 5?
I really don't know where it's going to go. I hope what happens in Episode 5 is Don kicks Lou Avery's ass.
Oh, I do too, and I think that's coming. I really do.
Yeah, I do too. Avery's such a waste. And on that note, Nick,
the lounge
is closed.
It's closed. Hey, Megan, thank you so much for joining us. Again, we didn't advertise this at all, and it's kind of a beta test thing for us, but I think you said that you hope we do it more often, and I think we will. And people like you hanging out kind of encourages us to do that, so we appreciate it. Ty, I guess that's it.
That's going to do it.
All right, so later.
See ya.